Welcome to another program of the Public Interest. I am Malika Ramsey. With me is Brigadier the Honorable David Granger, Leader of the Opposition and Leader of the People's National Congress Reform. Good day to you, sir.
Good morning, Malika.
All right. Now, last week we dealt with the upsurge of violence in our society. This week we sort of linked our program today to continue to focus on violence. However, we are dealing with the fact that a motion has been before the House for some time now. Of course, that motion is in the name of the opposition leader himself. The motion to establish a commission of inquiry to investigate the incidence of criminal violence in Guyana from 2000 to 2010. Of course, we're going to be chatting with the opposition leader today about that motion. And basically, I would want to start off by asking you, sir, what really are the root causes of criminal violence? Because, of course, you know, this says from 2000 to 2010, but we have not really yet eradicated. So what are the root causes of the criminal violence?
In my view, the biggest single cause in Guyana is the narcotics trade. There are other supplementary causes, you know, for example, poverty, discrimination, aggression, harassment by the police. But I think in Guyana, my own experience and my own knowledge taught me that the root cause of criminal violence is narco trade. Let me tell you, Malika, because 10 years ago I was on something called the Disciplined Forces Commission. And as a member of that commission, I took pains to ask every single representative of an organization who came before the commission what they felt was the root cause of violence, the single biggest threat to security in the country. And each one of them said the narco trade. So this is something people knew 10 years ago. And it is my view that when a careful analysis is done of the problems we've had in this country over the last decade, and particularly during the tenure of office of President Barrett Jackdaw, we will see that narco trade has done the greatest damage.
Okay. We could also say that the drug lords have used that period to somewhat extend or to help their I mean, this may be a wrong thing to say, but it is the reality, to extend their trade and to make what they call their business grow. Does that still exist? Does that situation still exist?
As recently as February 2013, the very month that we're in now, we have seen some strange executions. And many times when executions are conducted as part of the narcotics trade, no explanations are given. But there is an unwritten rule in the media community, or an unwritten understanding among the Guyanese public as a whole, that this type of execution is not domestic violence. It has to do with narco trafficking and gun running. So as recently as February 2013, we have had more executions. And in my view, nothing has really been done to eradicate narco trafficking, that is the bringing of drugs into the country. The government and the law enforcement agencies have been able to arrest a few, I would say, petty traffickers, small amounts, girls who stick a few grams in their brasiers on their underwear and other parts of the body. And we have not really dealt with the problem. The problem in Guyana is not a matter of getting the drugs out, getting the drugs in the first place, because we do not produce those drugs. And there was something called the National Drug Strategy Master Plan, which should have prepared the Customs Anti-Narcotics Unit and the security forces to prevent illegal narcotics from coming into the country. But I think for the last couple of years, under Mr. Clement Rohi, there has been no such plan. Even when there was a plan, it was never really fully functional. So I would say that there is still narco trafficking, and that is the reason why there's still the type of violence in this country.
Sir, I want to take you back a bit. Of course, I'm going to come back to the narco trafficking a bit later. It is customary, especially when a country is in a deteriorating state, for either the members of the opposition or some citizens in general to blame the state of the country, the deteriorating state of the country, especially in our case here in Guyana, we blame that on government. Persons may say that in the People's National Congress reforms era, that's when that party was in government, that criminal violence, it was not that rampant, but government changed in 1992, and according to your research and the research of others, the violence, the upsurge in criminal violence began in 2000. Now, my question basically is, what would have happened in that period from 1992 to 2000, as against from 2000 to 2013?
It is always difficult to put an exact date for a complex phenomenon such as, criminal violence, because, there's no publication in the newspapers, criminal violence starts today. There was a gradually deteriorating situation throughout the 1990s. And this came about because of the upsurge in transnational crime, that is, particularly on this continent, narco-trafficking. I don't need to go into all the details, but there were certain incidents in Central America, in Panama. The United States invaded Panama and arrested General Noriega, who was the head of state of Panama at the time. The fact is that from that time we noticed that drugs, particularly cocaine, had started to come in increasing quantities through Venezuela, Guyana, French Guyana, Suriname, and Brazil. That is, the drugs seemed no longer to be going through Panama into the United States. They came along the Amazon basin. So I would say that throughout the 1990s in Guyana, we had a gradual surge in narco-trafficking. And I think when we discovered this huge ship called the MV Danielson, I think it was in 1998, in which we noticed that people had the capability to move tons of cocaine. And then there were several incidents in other parts of the country. People were bringing aircraft, and sometimes the aircraft got damaged. They would land on roads, like the Mabura Road, which is not paved. It is just a dirt track, really. Some hinterland airstrips, there are about over 5 dozen airstrips in the hinterland which are not monitored. So I would say that the surge started in the late 1990s. So there's nothing magical about the year 2000. What we do know is that by that time, when Mr. Barjagdio became president, that the narcotics trade had already taken firm hold. It wasn't done on an amateurish basis. There were established drug lords, drug routes, and wealth was coming into the country. People were becoming fabulously rich. So by 2000, it was clear that the nature of crime had changed. So it was no longer robberies from the person. It had to do with the extension of the territory of the drug lords. People weren't concerned about stealing a watch anymore. They were concerned about getting more and more villages, more and more people to use drugs, because that's how they made their living. It's just like somebody selling sweet drinks, soft drinks, Just this time it was drugs, and it was that much more expensive. So we used the year 2000 to show that, hey, a change had taken place. There certainly was massive inflow of drugs, and people were becoming fabulously rich, and rich people wanted to become fabulously powerful, to control the security forces, to control the government, and to become richer still. So I would say that is what happened. The nature of crime changed from what it was in the 1990s, more or less, robberies on the person and so on, to the 2000, that is, international trade in narcotics.
I'm happy that you mentioned that the change in the nature of crime, because I also know that you spoke about the fact that there must be a mastermind, lookouts, and probably buildings or vehicles where weapons are kept, and in a sense that makes it a person immune to prosecution. I mean, if you can expound a bit more on that and really tell us how dangerous is that situation for our nation.
Well, it is very dangerous because my experience and my knowledge of the narco trade suggests that people can become fabulously rich by being allowed to use a nation state as a platform to export narcotics to Europe, North America, and elsewhere. To do this, they need to have the cooperation of rogue policemen, rogue officials, of magistrates, and of politicians. You cannot conduct this level of crime without the cooperation of people in government. And what happened in Colombia is that people started to buy off members of the National Assembly. And you can see that they were prepared to use violence to kill any persons who opposed them, whether they were in government or not, because they became so powerful. They brought in weapons, they got weapons from the former Soviet Union or other countries that were collapsing or prepared to sell them weapons. And they would just set up their own private militias, their own private army. Up to now, there is still a sort of guerrilla war taking place in Colombia. And this is what happened. You have armed people who are using weapons, using the connections with the government to extend their territory, to become richer, to corrupt more government officials, to increase their narco trade, to become rich. It becomes a cycle. And they never get rich enough, because in Colombia there was a case in which a man became so rich he started to buy giraffes and rhinoceroses and elephants, and it is no problem because the law enforcement agencies eventually killed him, and these animals are now wild. You now have rhinoceroses in Colombia, as part of the zoo that he built up, and in Mexico now you have thousands of people being killed because of narco trade. So the people in this country who allowed narco trade to take hold have taken a very dangerous step. And we saw what happened as a result of that between 2000 and 2010.
But it's quite interesting that you use the term, and it's a bit scary also, that you use the term rogue politicians, because it means that we're no longer at a stage where we have rogue police officers that who we no longer can control, but we actually have rogue politicians controlling them. I mean, how should a normal person in society feel about that? Because politicians, we vote for them, we put them there. How should we really feel?
Well, this is the problem we faced in Guyana, particularly during the regime of Bar Jagdeo, because from my analysis, it would have been impossible for drug lords such as Roger Khan to have done their work without the complicity of people in government. And as you know, at one stage there was really a horrible rate of killing, and a minister of the government had to be brought before a presidential commission of inquiry to be investigated about whether he was involved in actually running a death squad. And this is the first time it has happened, and people don't see the significance of that. That actually a minister was accused of running a death squad. Of course, there was no evidence, and there was no evidence largely because the prime witness was killed in his bed 8 days before the commission was sworn in. It's all a great coincidence that the person who broke the story to the United States Embassy, to the media, and to the public at large, before he could actually give evidence before that commission of inquiry, he was killed in his bed, a man named George Bacchus. So we have a situation in which there can be found a body of evidence which shows that politicians had links to drug lords and drug trafficking. There's never been any investigation apart from the Presidential Commission of Inquiry into Mr. Gadraj's behavior. But I do believe, and this is the reason why I brought the motion in the National Assembly, is that there is enough evidence to show that people high up in the government were involved in supporting the narcotics trade. In one particular case, We know that the order for the purchase of electronic eavesdropping equipment appeared on the letterhead of a certain ministry of this government. So somebody used the ministerial paper stationery to order this electronic equipment, which found itself in the hands of a drug lord. Now, that equipment was so sensitive that the company only sells it to governments. So the drug lord couldn't get that equipment on his own. He had to get it by being sponsored by a government. So there actually is a document which somebody posted. I don't know how authentic it is, but people have access to copies in which the name of a certain minister and his signature appeared, and the ministerial letterhead is clearly visible. So if it is ever proven to be true, it shows that the government and politicians could be complicit in the type of crime we've had.
You mentioned the name of a certain minister being implicated in the purchase of electronic equipment. Now, there was a lot of noise made about that. I mean, people took to the streets, we had protests, the opposition made noise. People believed that something would have been done. So my question really is, how is it possible that these things continue to happen and our people on the ground get no satisfaction, especially in that particular case, if you can answer that?
Well, things continue to happen because the narco traffickers have been on the ground for a long time. Certainly, you know, this is now 13 years, it's now 14 years since Mr. Jagdeo became president. He's no longer president, of course, but the narco trade thrived during his presidency. As I said, the narco trade doesn't, you know, traders do not sit on their hands. They go about their business. It's extremely lucrative. And when Roger Khan was discovered, he wasn't discovered here in Georgetown, he was discovered in Paramaribo with a policeman or a former policeman. And he was involved, he had millions of dollars worth of cocaine around him. The point should be made is that the narco traffickers were able to develop links with rogues in the law enforcement agencies, in the government, in political parties, and they created a friendly environment for the trade to prosper. And that is what happened. And we have not yet taken governmental action to uproot that trade. That is what is frightening, that the government is broadly aware of you know, who the persons are who are bringing drugs into the country, but has not taken action against them.
Can government be forced to take action?
Well, this is the job of the National Assembly, and this is why I brought the motion.
Okay.
Again, there is no force. You know, I cannot coerce the government. I cannot get an army and force the government to sign papers and take certain action. We are concerned that over the, well, since the start of the new millennium, the government has not acted decisively to bring this crime to an end. And the problem is, for us, that as long as the government does not take decisive action against the drug trade, there are going to be more killings, there are going to be more murders, there are going to be more executions. And this is what we're seeing now. And when an execution takes place, we just left to guess, or we are not given clear answers. Because people are hardly brought to trial. The only people who brought to trial are the very low-level couriers, you know, the mules, people who are carrying a few grams out. But the people bringing in cocaine by the ton are never really brought to trial.
I want to talk about the dossier that the opposition worked on a few years ago. Again, the public heard that, and you know, most of our citizens were happy. They were overjoyed that, look, the opposition, you know, is doing this and making effort, listing the amount of persons who were killed within a certain period. And that document should have done something for not only Guyanese as a whole, but for all those children who were still to this day crying for their parents, their friends, and their relatives and other loved ones. I don't know if you can specifically comment on the work of the dossier and why it has not benefited our people really, or in your opinion, if it has at all benefited us.
The dossier was important because it demonstrated the will of the opposition parties, the Alliance for Change, the Guyana Action Party, the National Front Alliance, and the Working People's Alliance was involved, and the People's National Congress Reform. Those were the GOPP at the time. And it was able to document some of the murders and executions which had taken place. But it was limited because it did not have access to the police records. Sometimes someone may be killed and the killer would try to make that death look like an accident, or they'd move the body from one place to the other. And sometimes it may be, a domestic murder, but they would say, oh, my house was broken into by bandits, who might have been aligned to some political party, and they killed my wife. He probably killed his wife, but he wants to give the impression that it was a political murder. And so there could be a lot of errors, and sometimes the dossier does not have the resources to conduct investigations to see whether these things are true. So it is there, it was circulated to some members of the international community, and I think it was able to galvanize public opinion against the government to show, look, you've got to bring these killings to an end, because there are really too many killings. And you should bear in mind too that people have started to put up monuments. For example, there's a monument to the massacre in Bartica. In fact, there are two monuments. There's a little monument in the police station compound where the policemen were killed. And there's also a monument out by the waterfront in Bartica. There's a monument now in Buxton, outside Tipperary Hall. The police also created a monument in Evelary, Kingston, to show that for the first time in the history of the police force is about 175 years old, and more people died during this period, 2000 to 2010, than throughout the rest of the history of the police force. More people died in that period, more policemen were killed in that period than throughout the entire history. So you can see it is not a period that we can ignore. And we don't want to go on building monuments. We want to have an inquiry. We want to have a commission to investigate these killings and bring this episode to an end.
People are really frustrated, and they expect, if the opposition can't help them, the next place that they want to, like as you rightfully said, that the dossier was exposed to the international community. Can anything be done for the international community to probably take a more hands-on look at what has happened in our country, and how limited is the international community really? Because people are thinking that the next place they should turn is the international community, and if they're not getting a response or anything that they think is progress, they're definitely going to lose hope in everything: government, opposition, and the international community.
I don't believe that the international agencies need to get involved in a direct way. This is a Guyanese problem, and I'm very hesitant to call on the foreign embassies to get involved in the internal affairs of our state. It is an extreme measure when we have appealed to our own government and the government is not responsive to our needs. But sometimes it's not very helpful to get the foreign elements involved, simply because I don't expect the Guyanese ambassador in the United States to get involved in the internal politics of the United States. That's not how diplomacy is conducted. I think we need to solve our problems ourselves, and for example, we can get assistance from the donor community, maybe to publish our findings or to mount an inquiry, but I strongly believe that this is a Guyanese problem, and the foreign embassies and other communities should not get involved unless they're requested to become involved.
Right. Now, you've also said before that, which is a fact, that we have a generation of children who grew up seeing bodies and blood, and they don't know anything else. That is like as if it's normal to them. What would David Granger and a Partnership for National Unity do in the event that you win the next election, you become the president, you become the government? What would you do to help that particular generation heal?
Well, it's important to find out what the truth is. Many people have perceptions about what happened during this period, and some of those perceptions might be wrong. We are calling on a commission of inquiry to establish the fact. How many people were killed? I mean, some people talk about 400, some 200. Nobody knows for sure. Quite a lot of people were killed. Again, when I was on the commission of inquiry, you know, people came and some reports were made. For example, one, a female pastor of a church on the East Bank told of how her son disappeared. And we know that bodies have turned up. Some have been claimed, some have not been claimed. And nobody knows for sure. So the first step is to call on Donald Ramatara, the president, to convene a commission of inquiry to determine how many people were killed, where they were killed, and if possible, why they were killed. I think that's where we must start. And that hasn't happened as yet, because the laws of Guyana require that in every case of a natural death, the district magistrate or the coroner must conduct an inquest. And in some cases, the DPP actually tried to obstruct the holding of inquests. For example, in the case of Shaka Blair, who was killed in April 2002. And there may be other cases when, because of pressure of work, the inquests were not convened. So my first step would be to have a commission of inquiry. And that is why I've taken a step now, because we need to bring this matter to a closure as early as possible.
Finally, sir, the motion to the actual motion to establish the commission of inquiry. When can we, because there has been some delay, I don't know how much you can say regarding that, but when can we see movement regarding that motion in the National Assembly?
Well, we had a very disturbed session yesterday, disturbed mainly because the Speaker actually walked out of the National Assembly without bringing it to a normal conclusion. But we expect the next sitting to be on the 21st, and we will bring it up again on the 21st. It is urgent because this motion concerns human life. This is not politics, this is not race, this is not party. This is the death of hundreds of Guyanese. And we owe it, and I have promised, and APNU will fulfill that promise to the Guyanese people, to investigate every single unnatural death that occurred between 2000 and 2010.
Finally, I think it's highly appropriate for me to ask you this question, because we saw some trouble, some things that are a bit abnormal in the last three sittings of the National Assembly. One week you had the government walking out. The next week, of course, the opposition walked out. And then the most recent sitting, the Speaker walked out. I don't know if you care to comment, because it's not looking very beneficial to our public, because people are now saying, if the Speaker of the Assembly can walk out, where does that leave our nation?
I'm not in a position to explain the Speaker's behavior. I'm as concerned about it as anybody else. The behavior of the PPP is quite predictable. They hoped that by leaving, they somehow could express dissatisfaction with the work that we were doing. But on the part of APNU, we did not really walk out. We simply refused to listen to Clement Roy, because the Speaker had ruled that he cannot speak. And the matter had been referred to the court, the matter had been referred to a committee of privilege. But as far as we're concerned, we are going to press on with our agenda, representing the people's rights, and make sure, especially in this case, that a commission of inquiry is convened to investigate all the deaths that took place between 2000 and 2010.
Thank you very much, sir. Brigadier the Honorable David Granger, opposition leader and leader of the People's National Congress Reform. Until next time, I am Malika Ramsey. Goodbye.